Okay, well, very warm welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon, this morning, this evening. I know we're all in different parts of the world, so it's an international audience, which is fantastic. So, welcome to Catholic Women's Ordination, otherwise known as Quo UK's annual gathering talk. And we're delighted that we're going to be welcoming back Miriam. I'll be introducing her or reintroducing her in a moment. Now, this little poem prayer, just a few lines. I'd love a volunteer to read it if that's okay. Just to say, some of you, the eagle-eyed among you, will remember that we embedded it in our letter, that is Wow's letter to Leo, open letter to Pope Leo. And I think it's a great few lines just to get us going from a feminist poet, Nicholas Lee, from her book Praying Like a Woman, published in 2004, but still fresh to this day.
Dare to declare who you are. It is not far from the shores of silence to the boundaries of speech. The path is not long, but the way is deep. You must not only walk there, you must be prepared to leap.
And amen to that. I'm great pleasure to welcome you, Miriam Duignan, our speaker for this year's Quo annual gathering. Miriam, I didn't run this introduction past you, but it's very similar to the one I did when I was introducing you at the Hants meeting, a little bit extra. Miriam was born in England to Irish parents. She was educated by Dominican nuns. She completed a degree in German and Russian and postgraduate studies at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley. Miriam is now Executive Director of the Wijngaards Institute for Catholic Research, which, as I'm sure we all know, focuses on bringing about reform through educational materials, as well as influencing decision makers inside the Vatican. Miriam is a long-time campaigner for gender justice in the Catholic Church. She's a regular columnist. She's an active member of Quo and Women's Ordination Worldwide, WOW, where she plays a key role in creating impact through campaign and action planning and communications. If you've been to Root and Branch or Tablet events this year, you'll have seen Miriam. You may have seen Miriam in May discussing John Wijngaards' legacy, and in June at a Tablet-hosted webinar about leadership in the Catholic Church. And the May talk, incidentally, which was hosted by Root and Branch, is available to you on the Root and Branch website if you haven't seen it. Having been, here's a personal note, having been with Miriam in Rome over the past 3 years, I think it is Miriam, isn't it, or 3 and a bit years, at pivotal times in the Vatican's calendar and for corresponding WOW actions, and having very recently spent time with her and others, incidentally, on this call at this year's WOW gathering in Bingen, Germany, I can attest to her courage, her determination, and a deep understanding of and commitment to our movement. And today, she's putting under the spotlight the Catholic hierarchy's argument that ordaining women would risk clericalising them to justify their continued exclusion from the priesthood. So I think we're in for an illuminating, interesting, and important talk and discussion. And we'll look forward after Miriam's talk to your observations and your questions. Thank you, Miriam, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you to all my friends in Catholic Women's Ordination for inviting me to speak, and thank you to all of you for being here. For those of you who are here live, thank you for taking time out of your Saturday, whether morning, afternoon, or evening. And I know that many people will be joining us on video that Peter is recording now, and welcome to you too. I'm really going to focus on the issue of clericalism, the accusation of clericalism rather than the issue. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I believe it is the patriarchal church's last stand. It is a term that is bandied about accusatorily at women, especially. Of course, you know, the term he's very clericalized or he's a very clerical type of priest is used for men, but it's used in a very particular way for women. And I'm going to talk about what that's all about. So I'll really discuss this from the perspective of current campaigning and witnesses and what I'm hearing on the street, or, well, actually more realistically in the convent and in churches, rather than wandering around the streets. Although we do hear a lot of that when we're in Rome, wandering the streets until we are detained. But we might get around to that later if we have time. The last detention that happened during the conclave in Rome, where Rhiannon and many others who are on this call or will be on the video were also detained. So I'll talk about the current situation and what we're hearing. And then I'll also share a few stories of some recent encounters where the issue to me about women being clericalized, the fear of women being sacramentally ordained, versus the reality in churches, in convents, in our parishes of what women really do, what they're allowed to do, and why is it that there is this last stand, this stranglehold on ordination and recognition of women's roles that certain men in the Vatican, in the ruling class, those who dictate how the church behaves and what we can and can't do, why they're clinging onto it, and why this term is being so readily used and accused for women. So just a little summary, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and by that I mean really everything, all roads do lead to Rome. Of course, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church are also the bishops and the cardinals, the monsignors and archbishops in your local country and your local parish. But we are a very centralized church, and the rules come from Rome. You cannot change things unless Rome says you can change things, no matter how much synodality we have, and no matter how many good priests and good bishops we have out there who are trying to change. It is Rome. So it is that hierarchy inside the Vatican walls that is a clerical caste. They are a separate caste. They are different to everyone else in the church. We are all lay people. They are a caste among themselves, above us. It shouldn't be that way, but they consider themselves to be a caste above us. They are increasingly justifying the exclusion of women from official formal ministry by claiming, and by that I mean recognized sacramental roles, by claiming that to ordain women, to make them priests, to have a sacramental ordination even of deacons, risks clericalising women. There's a big risk that us poor women will become clericalized. And that is now being presented as a great fear that we must all be afraid of and we must all be wary of. Pope Leo has said this himself a few times, that we cannot simply add women to the mix and risk clericalizing them. It would be a terrible mistake. So what are they talking about? We're hearing it nowadays more than ever. It's not a new thing. It's been around for a while, but we're hearing it more and more now. And that's because Catholics, like you, like almost everywhere, are more educated now. They know more. And the false teaching that used to be used to exclude women is so easy to debunk. You just need to look up on the internet, what did Paul really say about women being silent in church? What does Timothy mean when he says a woman shouldn't teach a man? And it's so easy to sort of debunk that it's almost embarrassing for a lot of priests and bishops. And certainly Pope Leo is not going to stand there and say, but Jesus only had 12 disciples, 12 apostles, because that's embarrassing. It's not true. And we all know it. They know it. And increasingly, they know they know it. And so they can't keep on rattling off these old lies and this fake, bogus theology. And so instead, the rallying cry that is bandied around to keep women out and to discourage us from campaigning for women's inclusion is this bogeyman of clericalism. The term originally applied to the very worst behavior of a certain type of cleric, a certain caste of cleric, not all men, a certain type of man who joined the priesthood possibly not for entirely holy reasons, but because it was a nice institution within which they could rise up the ranks, have a lot of privilege, a lot of power, eventually get themselves to Rome and have a grand old time deciding what other people can do and say, and living a life of privilege within those walls, in which that city-state, they will never have to confront a woman as their peer, and heaven forbid, as their boss. And it's that type of clericalized man. You know, the type that they wear excessive, elaborate clerical garb. They're focused on status. They're focused on power and superiority. And they don't really seem to have much sense of service and spirituality. We all know them, and they are a minority. But unfortunately, they are a very vocal and powerful minority who tend to gravitate towards the center of our world, which is Rome, and rise amongst the ranks. And so those are the ones that are trying to cast us out and keep us cast out. And the flip side of that is, we all know, and I believe, call me naive, but I really believe that the majority of priests had a true vocation, and they really want to serve as ministers. And they don't want to be called father or reverend all the time. They introduce themselves by their first name. Of course, they wear clerical garb when they are saying the mass, but the dog collar, whatever we're supposed to call it, the clerical collar and the robes, depending on what time it is in the universal calendar, that is just a uniform for a job. They are easily recognized. When you call in a chaplain and you want the priest to give you last rites, he comes in his collar, because then everyone knows that's a priest. It's just a uniform. They don't go increasingly over to the excessive, elaborate robes that we see. These ordinary priests, normal men, have as much contempt for clerical elitism as the average lay Catholic. And so what I'm talking about now is the small but vocal minority of very clericalized men who seek to keep women out and are succeeding. Unfortunately, the term clericalized has now been co-opted. It's now a derogatory slur that is used to prevent women from ever becoming priests, let alone the ability to become bad ones and clericalized ones. The term that was coined to apply to a certain subculture of priests is now being used to accuse women of being clericalized by virtue of even saying they want to be priests. It has got to the stage now where anyone who says that women can and should be priests is being accused of being clerical. And that is the tactic that is coming out of the Vatican now. The aim is that we never get the chance to be priests. You are treated with suspicion if you say that women should be priests. And it goes in line with the tale as old as time, which the Catholic Church has maybe not invented, but certainly maintained and amplified over the years, that women are presumed to be bad until proven otherwise. So you cannot possibly allow women into this structure, because of course they'll be bad, and we cannot risk being exposed to bad women, heaven forbid. Whereas men are lauded if they're not bad. I've just spoken about this. We all know the good ones and we celebrate them. And we are sad about the bad ones that give everyone else a bad name and who hold so much power. The title of my talk is Caste Out, because I believe this is a caste system. It's not based on your tribe, your geography, your hereditary position and your family. It is based on gender. And these certain men who see themselves at the top of the pyramid, the caste system of the Catholic Church, they are guaranteed that women will always be below them in that pyramid. And they are desperately trying to maintain that. And it is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory as in we're imagining it. It's a true intentional strategy. There is a script, there are talking points, because it is being spoken about in parishes, dioceses, meetings, media, Catholic media, the Vatican, all at once, saying the same thing. They are singing from the same hymn sheet, that we cannot, sorry, I'd love to help you, but we can't possibly ordain women because, you know, it's going to be terrible, and we don't want to clericalize them. Everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet when you ask people, why can't women be priests? Even the good ones that don't believe it. They've been told, this is our last line in defense, and you must stick to it. It is a stealth form of sexism, because the Vatican and the true sexists, you know, the real deep down misogynists who have such contempt for women and such fear of women, they're no longer allowed to say out loud that they find women disgusting, or that they just don't like them, or that they're inferior, and so of course you can't be priests. Now, what we are faced with is discrimination dressed up as chivalry. We don't want you to be corrupted by our terrible hierarchy. They are making it sound like they're doing us, women, a favor. You can't possibly come into this corrupt lion's den, heaven forbid. So let us just fix it sometime in the future, i.e. never, because nothing will be fixed unless you have a balance. And it's just a new way of maintaining that same old military style structure inside the Vatican walls. Keep women and their scrutiny and their drive for equality and all that would come with it away from us. We do not want equality. We do not want balance. Women need to be kept out of the boys' club where we get to do what we want. It is a refuge for men living without women as peers. They have perceived privilege, real privilege, but they perceive their privilege by the very fact that women cannot be their peer. And therefore, the Vatican and the hierarchy, the upper echelons of the Catholic structure, have become a beacon for sexists. And it is a bastion of male supremacy. Anyone who has studied at a seminary recently, or has met new ordinands, or seen the type of men that are coming forward to be priests, will be very worried, rightly so. Because unfortunately, in a world that is becoming more and more egalitarian, but also a world in which misogyny is really at an all-time dangerous high, there are men who flock to the Catholic Church as the one place, certainly in the Western world, the Catholic world, where they are guaranteed to live in a world without women, where women will just serve them, smile at them, and be subordinate to them. And that is what our church has become. The term clericalism and that accusation and danger warning about women and the risks of allowing women to be ordained to be the peers of men, it's just another continuation of the Roman Catholic Church's centuries of policing, restricting, and monitoring women's freedom and behavior. The legacy is still with us, just in new forms. It's a narrative that is really good girls versus bad girls, virgin versus whore. It's the same narrative dressed up as clerical. Good girls don't seek status and recognition. Good girls work behind the scenes. They serve. They don't ask for formal roles. When they say clericalising, they mean really women who are asking for recognition of the work they're already doing. And the church is very comfortable with women working in a priestly way or a diaconate way, preparing people for sacraments, keeping the parishes alive in areas where there is no priest, doing the Eucharistic service without doing the actual, the blessing of the Eucharist. Everything is carrying on with women in charge. They just can't be recognized as the equal to a priest. You have the humiliating and worrying and frankly bizarre image of nuns, and this came out during the synod on the Amazon region. You have this terrible practice of nuns running parishes, and where there are no nuns, there are other lay women, parishioners, who are running parishes and keeping everything alive and preparing people for sacraments. And then they have to send in a priest, sometimes, I kid you not, by helicopter. He comes in, he blesses the Eucharist with his ordained male hands, and then the nun administers that, sort of hands out the Eucharist and manages that for several months until the priest can come back in by helicopter. So the women are working as priests and deacons. They just can't be recognized as such. They know that women can lead and manage. Women are managing schools and hospitals, convents all over the Catholic world. But what they cannot do is be ordained the way man can, because that's the only thing that makes men special in their eyes. It makes them elevated. They are a higher caste, a higher class. It is the one last thing that men can do in the Catholic Church that women can't do, and that is to stop women being ordained. That's it. That's the only thing they are doing that women are not doing. Imagine if women were formally recognized, formally trained, they were paid, they had proper positions, proper parishes that they dedicated themselves to. And these are all perfectly natural impulses that male priests have. But the answer to that is always, why do you want that? Why can't you just serve without recognition? They have a desperate fear of women being peers, because women are supposed to be perfect. And they cannot be in a leadership position because then they risk upsetting someone, certainly the men. There are certain men in this clerical caste that could not bear the thought of being disappointed by a woman. And so they keep them out where they can never be in that position. We're not talking about theology here. We are talking about psychology. And that is, a topic that needs to be delved into a little bit more. So there is the role of priest, and then there is the rank of priest. Women are essentially doing the role. They just cannot hold the rank, speaking in military terms, because that's how certain men see it. And so I'm going to quote for you from a letter that Women's Ordination Worldwide wrote to Pope Leo. Rhiannon mentioned it in the introduction. And in it, we mention this, and Women's Ordination Worldwide and Quo and all of the other wonderful groups that campaign for the equality of women are saying this over and over again, that women do the work. And we know this from so many synods and the synodal documents where almost every parish in the world, every diocese in the world, those that we were allowed to read, talked about women being recognized for the work they are doing, managing parishes and churches. And so in our letter we wrote to Pope Leo, we represent the millions of Catholics, clerics and religious sisters included, who during synodal discussions spoke boldly in favor of ordaining women, to finally recognize them for the ministries they already perform whilst being consigned to the shadows of official structures. This was one of our demands to Pope Leo. But it is a delaying tactic. It sounds reasonable. It gives people pause for thought. Even the most open and reform-minded of Catholics can find themselves being told, oh no, we couldn't possibly ordain women because then they'll be clericalized. We don't want them to join that terrible structure. Find themselves thinking, oh, maybe there is something to be said for waiting until the Pope fixes the system. Maybe women shouldn't join, but they can maintain this lie and this stalling tactic forever. And no institution has ever been reformed whilst keeping out one half of its members. And certainly it cannot be reformed and renewed with a male-only club that seems focused obsessively on maintaining male supremacy and a narrative and a continuous messaging and preaching of how women must not be the equals of men, and that it is a dangerous situation if they even seek that. No institution could ever fix themselves whilst behaving like this. So I'm going to give you another quote from our letter to Pope Francis, which we wrote in Bingen on the feast day of Hildegard of Bingen. She was a wonderful, amazing woman who lived, 1,000 years ago, way ahead of her time, so powerful and spoke truth to power in the sense that she would regularly admonish clerics and spoke to the bishops in Mainz and the cardinals. She wrote letters to the Pope telling him what he needed to do to fix the church. This was 1,000 years ago, and there was a nun, the abbess of the monastery in Bingen, who was calling out the sins of the clerical caste at that time and telling them how to fix the church. And here we are, still doing it. So we wrote, based on her example and inspired by St. Hildegard, we wrote to Leo, as St. Hildegard taught us, no environment or structure can survive without the harmonious interconnectedness of all creation. The Catholic Church suffers from a sickness of sexism that resonates throughout and afflicts the whole world. So, speaking of Saint Abbess Dr. Hildegard, I'm going to tell you just a few examples, 2 examples from recent visits to convents that happened actually all in the last 4 weeks. So the first, when we were in Bingen, our wonderful WOW member and guide, Annette Esser, managed to get the WOW group into the abbey. And there was one very brave, fabulous nun who agreed to meet with us, knowing that we were women's ordination campaigners. Now, if you think about the time of Benedict and even early Francis years, even admitting that you were speaking to campaigners for women's ordination would be a sackable offense, frankly, especially if you're a nun, but also priests. And so this woman agreed to meet with us. She was curious. She's a friend of Annette, and she was a lovely, fabulous nun, Benedictine, fully habited in Hildegard's abbey, what would have been, it's a modern iteration, but in the same place. And she met with us, and I was translating between her German and the group's English. And so Annette explained in German that what we did, and she also explained the tradition of women being ordained as Roman Catholic women priests, starting with the River Danube and most recently in Rome on the River Tiber. And she was talking and said, when I said to her, what do you think of women priests? The sister just was horrified. She said, absolutely not. No way can women be priests. No. Very sort of viscerally, immediately responded to say, no, that's not possible. I don't agree with it at all. And I said, well, can you imagine, a time when women can be priests and that it will come one day? And the sister said, only if all of the men are gone and there is literally no one left to bless the Eucharist and administer the sacraments, only then would I consider that women could be ordained as priests and formally take on that role. So essentially, I couldn't quite understand what she meant. I said, do you mean all the men have to die? But that's, it's just not possible. It didn't make sense in any way that you don't agree with women priests and don't believe that women should be ordained and formally carry out those roles, but they could if there were no men that wanted to do it. To me, it was symptomatic of the indoctrination and the propaganda that we are being faced with, that women seeking ordination, women saying they have a vocation to priesthood, is abominable. It is unladylike, it is unbecoming, it is something that is not right for women to do. And so therefore, I could accept women priests if they weren't really asking for it. The church had to ask them because they'd run out of men. So is it about priesthood or is it about prejudice? Is it about the role of priest or is it about the rank of being ordained and therefore superior to women and controlling and supervising women because they cannot be left to their own devices? But what happened next was very interesting. So among our group of WOW campaigners was a priest, a woman priest, Jennifer, from America. And I said to the sister, this lady is a priest. She's a real priest. She's been ordained and she has a parish and she works as a priest. She serves as a priest. And then a discussion started between Jennifer and the sister. I'm not going to name her because I don't want her to get fired. And after that discussion, sort of back and forth, the sister said to me, but if she's really following a calling from God, if she feels that that is her true vocation and she is serving as a priest and is doing what God has asked her to do, then I agree with it. Then I approve. I bless her. I welcome this. This is amazing. And she was very supportive, and I could tell also a little bit confused. So, because what we are taught to believe and what she has been taught to believe, like all of us, is very different when you have an encounter with someone who actually felt a true vocation to be a priest, to serve as a priest, to minister to communities, and is actually doing the work and sought ordination because that is the way that we as a church recognize our priests, bless our priests, and send them forth. Whether or not you agree with the current sacrament of ordination or how it's written or how it's done, that's just the way we do it. We then had, so there was a wonderful experience. And then the following day on the feast day of St. Hildegard, which was the day after we'd had this encounter on the Tuesday, several of the WOW group, I did not go, went to the mass and the ceremony and the showing of Hildegard's relics. You know, it's a big event in Bingen. And of course, we saw them setting up the altar. We knew what was coming. It was only men on that altar celebrating the mass in honor of this feisty, fabulous, strong, powerful, influential woman. Annetta went up to the priest that she knows afterwards and said, you know, without talking about ordination, without talking about what we had been discussing the day before in the group she was with, that he looked confused and almost very defensive and said, but we had a girl who was altar serving and a woman read something. I mean, what more do you want? Was essentially what he was saying. And so you have all of this going on, that you are the bad guy even by calling it out. And what more do you women want? You know, why on earth would you even ask me that? But then the nun, who when confronted with a real priestly person who happens to be in feminine form, then changed her mind and said, well, then go with God. It's clearly the right thing to do. I then was in another convent, because this is just, you know, how things roll. Last Sunday in Connemara, I was at Kylemore Abbey, also Benedictine nuns in Ireland. And they have the office at 12 on a Sunday, and then there's mass at 12:15. So I went in before 12, and there were three Benedictine nuns, again, habited, practicing readings and songs. And I went up to them, and yes, okay, you could say this was slightly provocative and a rhetorical question, but I went up to the nuns and I said, at 12:15, when the formal mass starts, is a man coming in to say that mass? You know, there's 20 plus nuns there now in Kylemore, maybe more. And the abbess looked at me as if I was a lunatic and said, you mean a priest? And I said, yes. And she said, well, of course. And I said, but why can't you just say the mass? And yes, I know the answer to that, and I know it's not going to happen, but every now and then, just like the situation in Bingen with the mass and the days dedicated to St. Hildegard, it has to be taken over by men, and it just makes no sense. These women, some of them will be called to priesthood, and they could lead that mass. And I said, you know, I would love to see the sisters saying mass. And the abbess, the chief nun, said to me, "What planet are you from?" And I said, you know, I know it's not possible, but why isn't it possible? And she was getting clearly uncomfortable, and you know, and I didn't want to push it, and I didn't want to upset them. I wrote a note in the guest book at Kyle Moore saying, I am praying that Holy Spirit, Wisdom, Sophia will cast out the sin of sexism and allow these sisters to say the mass. You know, and then I watched from the window. I didn't go in because I just couldn't bear it. I didn't go in. There's a little glass section just, you know, so I went back in after I'd been through the Abbey. And I had a little look, and at 12, the nuns were singing the office, and it was so beautiful, and they were in a circle around the altar. And then at 12:15 exactly, this man sort of floated in to the altar and took his position behind the altar. And it was almost sort of like they were the backing singers, or they were the warm-up act. And then the real star had to come in to bless the bread, for want of a better, holier phrase. I think this man had come from England. He had an English accent. And there are 15 plus nuns sitting there in this abbey. And on a Sunday, they have to wait for this man to come in from wherever they've got him that week. And it disturbed me. And, you know, it's a very familiar tale, but sometimes you just see it from new eyes and you're just like, what is this? But what the abbess said to me was, well, you know, we are allowed to read the gospel, we are allowed to lead prayers and do all of these things when it's not Mass, the Eucharist, as if that was okay. And then she said to me, if you mean ordination, no. So the word ordination sort of struck fear and terror into her heart. Again, going back to this propaganda and this brainwashing that we have all been at the mercy of. That when you say ordination, when you say that women could be sacramentally ordained, it's just like, it's so off-putting to certain people who have really bought into this, that it is unbecoming and wrong and would upset the men, and we cannot have that. You know, the reality of ordinations, I don't know how many of you have been to ordinations. They're beautiful. Whether it's a man or a woman, I've been to both. It's a lovely ceremony. It's a celebration of a vocation. It is a going forth, you know, blessing to go forth. And yeah, you could disagree with some of the words and want to change things, but very few men who get ordained would then tell you that they believe they have been ontologically changed, that they have magic hands now, that they are sacred, that they are above us. Just like those women who were ordained on the Tiber last year didn't just suddenly turn into these people who lord it over everyone, who wear elaborate robes. They've gone back to their communities to serve as priests in the truest sense of the word, and help their communities and follow their vocation to do that job. So the word ordination has also been co-opted as a sort of danger, when actually it's just a sacrament and it's a blessing like any other. And it just means that you're now qualified and you have the community's blessing to go forth and be our priest. And clerical garb should be a uniform for a job just like any other, and not seen as the absolute sign that women have got ideas above their station and they want to dress like men. Since when is putting on a clerical signifying robe, especially when it's a dress, dressing like men? We don't look at doctors wearing a white coat now, even though women were never allowed to be doctors for the longest time. We don't look at them now and say they're dressing as men, because they are suddenly wearing the white coat that signifies the job that they are qualified and have been essentially blessed to go forward and do. You know, yesterday we had the wonderful news of the first ever Archbishop of Canterbury to be a woman, Bishop Sarah Mullally, which was wonderful. And I am sure that all of you, when you read that news, when you heard that news, did not think, oh my God, isn't she clericalized? how could she accept this role in such a corrupt institution? Oh my goodness, who does she think she is? Why couldn't she just stay where she was as a priest in a village somewhere? You know, we celebrate it. We know that there can only be health and unity and correct justice when women can do what they should always have been allowed to do. And if you don't like the thought of women leading churches, then you shouldn't be a Christian, because they always did from the very beginning. And so it's you know, it's something that you would never accuse Sarah Mullally of. Some people might, but you certainly wouldn't think that straight off. If you have a 14-year-old girl coming to you or coming to her careers advisor and saying, you know what, I think I might want to be a priest, you wouldn't say to her, who do you think you are? And are you power hungry? And you're trying to usurp a male role? Do you want to have authority over men? This is unnatural. You would celebrate it, and you would say, well, let me help you figure out how you can do this if you're in the Anglican community, or join the campaign to ordain women as priests in the Catholic community. You know, and the jubilation with which male ordinands are received, and seminarians and those who put themselves forward to have their vocation tested. You just have to say, if you wouldn't say it to a 14-year-old boy, why would you say this and imagine this future clericalized way of being to a girl? And so when I'm confronted with this, and if I get the chance, and if it's not, causing too much conflict, the way that I say to people when they try to persuade you that women shouldn't be ordained into official ministry, the questions I ask are, if clericalism and being clericalized is so inevitable, why is the church still welcoming male vocations to the priesthood? Not only welcoming, but actively advertising, lobbying, campaigning, begging, I would say. Why? Surely these young men, or any man, is just as much at risk of being clericalized, becoming one of those minority of priests who care only about status, power, do not really want to be priests. Why is it we're allowing men to still do this? Why not stop all ordinations to priesthood? That's not going to happen, because they know they're never going to fix that, because it's just a part of human nature. In every institution, you will have those who gravitate towards that abuse of power and corruption. What we need to do as a church is make sure that those very people aren't the ones that also happen to be in the most senior positions, which I'm afraid they are now. That's the problem with the Catholic Church. And also, if we accept that many male priests have a true vocation to service and spirituality and won't become clericalized, why can we not extend that benefit of the doubt to women? Why are women always presumed to manifest the worst possible traits of humanity when men are given the benefit of the doubt? And also, do you believe, are we expected to believe, that women are so vulnerable to corruption and becoming status obsessed that they would inevitably all become power hungry and assume those worst traits? And then, really, I think the crux of the matter is we're not talking about clericalism. We're talking about radical patriarchy and male supremacy. That is the problem. We're calling it clerical, but really those men who behave in that clericalized way are male supremacists and radical patriarchs who absolutely will not allow women to join their ranks, because they want to always be superior to the perceived inferior caste, which is women. So it is that has rendered the priesthood fertile ground for corruption and crime, and not the fact that they are ordained as priests. That is a starting point, I believe, of innocence and presuming the best, and go on your way and be a good priest. And it is patriarchy and sexism and corruption that then leads them off the path to what we now call clericalized men. And ultimately, I suppose when people say this to you, the very quick answer is, if you wouldn't say it to a man, you cannot say it to a woman. That why do you want to be recognized for this role? Why can't you just carry on with the work? Why do you feel the need to be ordained? Why should we have a ceremony for you? Why do you need to join the ranks of priests and be recognized by the church? And so that really is the ultimate answer, is you wouldn't say it to a man. It doesn't apply to a man. And then why? The problem is beyond priesthood, and it has global ramifications, as we said in the Wow letter. We are allowing, as long as we allow this narrative to keep being spoken and perpetuated, we're allowing the church to model that women must always be under the supervision and authority of men. The Catholic-controlled media, the government lobbyists, the healthcare facilities, the schools that the Catholic Church runs, they are propagating this narrative that women must always be under the authority of men, therefore they cannot be priests. That is what children are hearing. In the world right now, I think you would agree, there is a massive backlash against women's liberation and women having access to positions of leadership and influence. And the church is doing nothing about it. In fact, they are magnifying it. It has become a magnet for misogynists, and they use their institutional power to limit women's freedoms and preach against equality. It's not passive, it's active. And this is the problem that we are confronting with. And this is why those of us who campaign for women's ordination do so not just for those wonderful priests that we all know and the right for them to exercise their vocation and serve the ministry, but because of what it means when we allow the church to keep on spinning these lies, perpetuating these terrible myths about women and how they're dangerous if they become ordained and have access to the power structure that they will of course abuse, and they cannot be allowed there. You know, we cannot take this faith institution seriously as a moral authority because they are obsessed with messaging that women who want equality are dangerous and bad. We were detained by the police at the conclave, and there were other groups in Rome at that time sending very strong messages to the Vatican and to the cardinal electors who were in the Sistine Chapel about to elect a new pope. We are the only ones that got hunted down, sought after, and detained and told that we must leave Vatican property and not come back for the duration of the conclave. Those were women's ordination activists who, after our pink smoke event, the morning, the opening of the conclave, we were not campaigning. We did not have any material. We were not, doing anything that wasn't allowed. We also had a permit to do the pink smoke protest above the hill above St. Peter's. But they had our picture and they were hunting us down. And a policeman finally admitted to me, after many, many protests by many of us, what is this all about? You have no right to detain us. You have upset the cardinals, not the campaigners who were reading out the names of cardinals who had allowed child abuse. God bless them. And the campaigners for SNAP who were doing that. They were not followed, had their photos shared. They were not pursued, and they were not detained by police to get them out of the square. It was us, because we were drawing attention to the lies that the official Catholic Church spreads about women. And because it is resting on such thin ground, on such thin ice, that it is us who are asking for full equality and making a big noise about it and drawing attention to the fact that there is no valid reason. We are the dangerous ones. We are the ones that were perceived as a threat to those men, and we were told openly, you have upset the cardinals, and we have been told to find you, shut you up, shut you down, and remove you from this area. Basically, they were trying to make sure that we didn't speak to the media anymore. It didn't work, but that's what they were trying to do. And so I think one of the solutions is we have to just keep on talking. We have to keep on campaigning. We need to keep getting women in front of bishops and priests with their vocation stories and nuns, and really when you have personal encounters, it's very difficult to say these terrible things to women about how clericalized and evil they are. And that's why the Pope won't meet us. We've asked him to, but it's unlikely, because I can imagine if we brought in women who had vocations, who spoke honestly to him, that it would be very difficult for him to keep perpetuating this nonsense. Part of the letter to Pope Leo from Women's Ordination Worldwide this September, we said, we know that you know there is no theological or scriptural impediment to women's sacramental ministry. As a canon lawyer, it must pain you to hear the misogynistic myths claiming women never exercised ministries. In particular, Canon Law 1024, because he is a canon lawyer, which denies the fact that women receive the same baptism as men, which is the core qualification for all ministries, as demonstrated by the early followers of Jesus Christ. That was what we wrote to Pope Leo. And that is what we need to keep on saying to the leaders of our church. We know that they know there's no real reason, and we need to keep getting in front of them and speaking the truth. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And just to remind people that the letter that Miriam's been quoting, the letter to Leo, Pope Leo, is an open letter. So it is for onward transmission. Thank you so much, Miriam, for your engaging or inspiring talk to us, and for your valuable historical and global and contemporary perspectives. And how right that you talked to us about Hildegard as well, who achieved, Hildegard of Bingen, who achieved extraordinary success as she is, yes. As a woman in a patriarchal society, it's changed, overcoming, as we know, society. And you reminded us, societal barriers to become a healer, a composer, and a preacher. And as we know, and as you reminded us, her writings emphasize the equal dignity of women and men. And you set that against your description of Hildegard's feast day in 2025, the celebrations in Bingen. One of the many paradoxes that our movement must wrestle with and challenge, for sure. So thank you for leaving us with that challenge as well. Right.